now. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for joining us, and especially thank you to our panel who are going to talk to us today. I won't go around and spend time doing people introduce themselves, because we're going to spend most of the session doing a Q&A. So when we do go into the Q&A, if people just say who they are, that will serve the purpose of sort of introducing. We're recording this session, and anything we put in the chat, we're going to put some resources up in the chat for people. So if you've got any resources or anything that you think is helpful, if you've come across a guide or a web page or something that you think is helpful, please just pop it into the chat line, because we'll save all of those, and we'll also send those out to everyone who's been online today. So, and I'll put a couple up, and I know our panelists have already sent through some stuff to me in the past, so I'll pop all of those things up. But we'll get started on, we've called it grandly an information session, but really it's going to be more of a conversation. So it's a conversation with Jen and Caleb, who were successful in the 2020 round of the NHMRC Leadership Scheme. They both were successful in getting Emerging Leadership 1 grants. So I thought it would be really useful if they could just have a conversation with us and talk to us about their experience, and talk to us about any reflections they've got in terms of when they put in their applications and how they saw the process. And Ben from Research Services is also going to have a chat with us, so he can take us through how we do it and the logistics bits of it. So people may have questions about that. Hopefully you've all got your minimum data in, but there might be some other questions that you've got of the logistics. So we'll then throw it sort of open after the three of them have spoken. But this is really an opportunity to hear, as I said, from your colleagues, from your peers who have been successful in obtaining one of these, and they are very prestigious and very competitive grants. And so it's good to hear their insights, so that it can help you and help us when we go through a process of self-reflection and self-evaluation. Am I ready? Okay. And by that I mean, not are you ready as in, you know, what time is it, 1 o'clock, but are you ready as in, are you competitive? Do you feel you're actually competitive enough? Have you got what you need in terms of the runs on the board relative to opportunity, what that means? Okay, so we can unpack what that means a little bit. Are you ready for what it's going to take in terms of how much effort you have to put into writing these grants? Okay, they're a real time commitment in terms of what you have to write. And are you ready for if you get it? Okay, and you actually have to become an emerging leadership fellow, okay, and you actually need to then deliver on the proposal that you've actually put forward. So it's a nice opportunity to talk to those who have had experience, and that they can give us their reflections. So when you're ready, Jen, I'll stop sharing screen, and if you've got something to share, please go ahead. If not, just talk to us.
Sure, thanks, Jeanette. I'll just share my screen, and can everyone see that as the full screen view?
Yep, all good.
Excellent. So yes, I am ready. Thank you. Thanks for inviting myself and Caleb to have a talk about our experience with the NHMRC Investigator Grant Scheme, and yeah, hopefully some of the reflections and experiences that we can share with you today will help with the preparation of your upcoming application, either for this round or if you're thinking about applying to the future. Just one little point of clarity. Sorry, Jeanette, I was successful at EL2, not EL1. I wasn't eligible for EL1 because of my previous NHMRC ARC Dementia Research Development Fellowship. And I know there's others on the line today that are also looking at applying at EL2. I've seen a couple of names come up already. So for those of you that are looking at applying at either of the EL levels, that's totally fine. The information that Caleb and I will share today is going to be transferable across both of those levels.
My apologies, Jen.
That's okay, no worries. I had a couple of people emailing me asking when they saw the comms. I thought just clarify, so all good. So I'll just jump to the next slide. The first thing I just wanted to highlight quickly was just around the proportion of the NHMRC's funding that goes to investigator grants. So I think most of you would be aware, so the NHMRC receives an MREA, a Medical Research Endowment account from the federal government every year. That's almost $1 billion roughly to allocate to health and medical research. And of that, 40% goes to the investigator grant scheme. So it's a substantial proportion of the MREA, which means that there is quite a lot of money up there for grabs to support researchers to do independent research into their field of inquiry. But just to give you a quick breakdown on the success rates, you can see this is the last lot of data, and Ben has this available in the document that he's circulated, I know, to Jeanette and myself, and I'm sure many of you have seen it already. I guess the reason I wanted to highlight this quickly is because you can see that based on the level that people apply at, so the 2 EL2 levels or the 3 L leadership levels, there's a very stark difference in the success rates over here. So you can see that probably, you know, the EL1 and the leadership 2 are looking kind of around the ballpark NHMRC range. There's a very, very tight bottleneck at EL2 and L1 where the success rate's getting kind of below the 10% mark. And then it just bumps up astronomically here at L3 to pretty much a 50% success rate. So it's just something to be aware of as you're going through the scheme. So you do have a better chance of success at EL1, I think, if you can apply for that and you fit the new kind of descriptors they put in around justifying your career level, etc., then you're going to have a better chance at this level. And so there's some people I've spoken to where I'm sort of encouraging them to go here just based on their track record and where things are at, because the success rate's better. And then this is obviously the mid-career bottleneck that's quite challenging for some of us as well. And then, yeah, get up to L3 and everything's fine apparently once you're a full professor and have 20 years of clinical research under your belt. Okay, so all is not lost. I guess, sorry, the point I was going to make on this slide as well is that as well as just kind of being aware at the level that you're pitching at and where you're eligible, which I know Ben will talk about more as well, it's don't give up hope, because if you're not successful the first time you apply, you might be successful the next time. So personally, I wasn't successful in my first application that went through. I was a near miss. I scored a category 6 but was unfunded, and then the next time I came through I scored category 6 again but just made it over the line into the funding category. So if you're not successful the first time, just put in again, tweak your application, get some feedback from mentors and peers, those who've had experience with the panels as well. If you know people who've been on the investigator grant panels, we can talk a bit more about that later on, about what the reviewers are looking for. Then really try and get people to review your grant and get it to that notch to get it over the line if you're not successful the first time. Okay, so I just want to run through really quickly some tips I've received from the Research Impact Academy and also from some of my colleagues and peers and mentors around how to structure the impact section and then also how to structure the knowledge gain section. Then I'll just highlight some of the quick tips and then finish off with some resources. So it shouldn't take too long, but this is an area that a lot of people I think get confused on with the impact section of the investigator grant. There's 3 major fields, field 1, 2 and 3 I'm going to call them, but basically the first one is around describing the reach and significance of the research impact that you've had. And so some people are curious about, well, how am I not repeating myself in fields 2 and 3? There seems to be so much overlap in what they're actually asking for. But if you go into and look at the detail, there are some distinctions between them, and that's what you really need to tease out in these sections. So when you're writing field 1, this is the Research Impact Academy gave me, and that was basically look at starting your sentences, phrasing your work around this is my work, my research and my program. So it's all about the reach and significance of the research impact, and you need to be putting yourself front and center with that. So the thing that you need to talk about is the original work that you've actually done, and then how others have gone on and built on that to find something new, or they've used your ideas or a method you've created or a tool or something like that to find something new. And this is looking at, if you're looking at the knowledge category, which is where I was pitching my particular grant. So one of the ways you can do this is find out what other people have done with your work and how they're using it. And I'll give you some tips on that later on, but this is the kind of thing you want to highlight around the evidence in this section. Field 2 is the research program's contribution to the impact. And so people are like, well, how does this actually differ to the impact that I'm describing in field 1? And so a way to think about it is using some slightly different wording by saying things like the program has done X, Y, Z, or the research contributed to this particular impact or this particular change in these statistics. My work within this program did X, Y, Z. And then field 3 is around the applicant's particular contribution to the research program. So this is where you can start to show some of your leadership and your contributions. So things like, I did this particular thing. My contribution was demonstrated by my presentation at this conference as the lead author, my publication as senior author, my role in this particular grant, etc. And basically what it proves is that as part of this research impact story that you're telling from fields 1 to 3 is that, you didn't just pick up the phone, or you weren't just part of a successful lab or a successful team that generated this impact. It was driven by you, and you were responsible or played a leading role in that impact. And what you can also do and tap into this is you can extend beyond the program and talk more broadly about your recognition in terms of your contribution to the field. So that helps as well. You can say how, for instance, you presented this at a national conference or an international conference as the lead author, and that resulted in this award or this recognition or this invitation by so-and-so to give this particular keynote presentation somewhere else. And so it helps to kind of build this understanding that you're a leader and you're an emerging leader in your own right, and the impact that you've created is starting to tell that narrative that you're driving the work. And the knowledge gain section, just a couple of tips here in terms of the structure. So this section has a statement that you're meant to put right up front, which is around the vision. So I was given the advice that this is a really important bit. So it needs to be short, sharp, punchy, and get to the point. It has to talk about the change that the research is actually going to make. So my vision is going to be X, Y, Z. I'm going to cure the whole world of dementia, or whatever it is that you're trying to do in your grant. To achieve this, I will, and then you state how you're going to make that change. And so just be really unambiguous and clear here, and state what your vision is up front. Don't kind of leave it for the reviewers to work out, oh, this is the vision bit. Have a heading, vision, or start it with something like, my vision is this. So it's really obvious, and the reviewers don't have to sort of think about it as they go through and read between the lines in your grant. The other advice I was given is to add a paragraph or a half page at the very, very start on the first page about what the knowledge gain is. And so you would directly address that criteria, talking about what does NHMRC actually gain from you doing this work? What is the work actually going to do? So what difference is it going to make? How are you going to solve these huge problems? And what will it change for the outcomes of the people that you're trying to affect? So if it's the population you're trying to help, or to the field more broadly around the knowledge that you're going to contribute. And then also demonstrating, that there's an understanding that it has the potential to, affect particular methods or, other fields more broadly beyond what you're actually working on for your particular project. So kind of the extended reach of that work. And then after that, so this is kind of the whole first page, I guess, in terms of structuring it. This should kind of follow with your aims around a plain language summary of the aims. So essentially it kind of eases the reviewers into your grant. So it's not too complicated. You're not getting really jargony up front. It's very straightforward. You've got vision, you've got what you're going to gain from it, what society more broadly will gain, and then the aims. And then after that, you can go into your background section and everything beyond and get more detailed. But something you should be aware of is that although the panels are sorted into leadership versus emerging leadership applications to review, they are completely mixed in terms of their expertise. So on one panel, you might have people from clinical work or public health or basic science all together on the one panel. So just be aware of that. And that's why it's so important to try and state things as simply as possible in a way that people who have a broad understanding of research and health and medical research will understand, but it's not going to be so technical from the very start that it's going to go over the head of 3/4 of your panel. So just a few quick tips. Ben will come to this, I know, but really be careful about how you read the grant and peer review guidelines. Just look at them and use them as, I guess, your Bible or your Torah or whatever for this process. It should basically be tabbed on your browser, open all the time in Adobe, whatever, and use them, really, really, really use them very carefully and read them closely. The nomenclature that's provided in your category descriptors is really important around how you demonstrate the types and also the evidence of the research impact that you've had. So people always say this, oh, of course you're going to use the keywords, but it's even more important here. So some of the advice I was given was, you know, instead of saying my work has been cited X many times, you can say things like my work has been used by this many people, or it has been taken up by this many people. I've reached this many people with my work, and it's sort of helping to use the language that the reviewers are using to appraise your actual application. One good way to do this, and I kind of alluded to this at the start, around particularly for your Field 1 impact section, which is where you're talking about the reach and significance of your work, you can trawl through Google Scholar and look at who has cited your work. So this is really helpful if you put it together as a spreadsheet. You can also get information from SciVal or Insights as well with this, but I find the Google Scholar adventure quite fun. You can map out with particular publications or pieces of work that you want to actually specify and use in this section to demonstrate your impact, and say, find out how many different co-authors were from how many different countries on each paper that cited your work. And so you can make a spreadsheet of this, and you might find that there's teams from like 20 or 30 or 40 different countries citing your research. So you can say that it's spread across the world in this many countries. And then you can look at the fields of research they come from, and that also might surprise you. Other fields that are using your work. So research, and this is about the reach of your impact. So it's going beyond your field. And you might actually be surprised. I was like totally stoked. I found out one of my honours thesis when I published it from 2010 was actually cited in a report by NASA. So I was able to claim that in my grant and say my work has even been, you know, extensive reach to NASA, blah, 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 helping astronauts do X, Y, Z. And, you know, I look at people with dementia and aging research now. So it was something that blew my mind that you can add in there, and you might be really surprised about what you find. The other thing is just try and glean as much data as you can from Insights and SciVal. You can get information like proportion of your papers that have an international collaborator on that helps to demonstrate your networks, etc., which is really important for the leadership section. And in terms of leadership, things like your role as the first, second, or senior or corresponding author is really important as well. And so this kind of taps into how you are going to select your top 5 publications, which is actually worth 35% of your scoring for the grant. So if you think about trying to get a mix of papers that are demonstrating first or senior authorship, that's really good because it's showing your leading role in those papers. So it's going to feed that narrative around your leadership. Papers that have a high field-weighted citation impact, or they've got great outmetric scores, they're in a top journal like the top 1% or the #1 journal in the field, or it's had something that's made a really substantial contribution to the field. So just trying to pick a mixture of papers that'll help to showcase a range of these metrics if possible. If you don't have all of those things, that's okay, but just try and select as much as you can that'll kind of tick at least some of these boxes. The other bit that I mentioned at the start is just knowing the difference in the impact section between fields 1 and 3. That's really important for getting that narrative right. And then evidence absolutely everything you're going to say. I'll share these resources in the chat. I think you mentioned, Jeanette, that you would share them with everybody else as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I'll post those resources in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen. We won't take questions of Jen specifically now. How about we jump to you, Caleb, and you can give us your experience at EL1. I've got that one right, which is still a great achievement. So yeah, Caleb, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Jeanette. And I'm not going to be as formal as Jen, and I always feel embarrassed whenever I present after Jen because she's got lovely slides and I've just got some notes to talk off of as well. So I put together my sort of top 10 tips, and then I found out that I have 11 or 12. So I thought we'd just call them top tips. And I guess to sort of start off and sort of frame the scheme as well, I think, you know, thinking about this is relatively new NHMRC's scheme that supports salary for 5 years and also supports project funding. So it's quite a generous, for EL1, you're getting 50 grand a year for 5 years and around about 80 grand per year for your salary as well. So it's quite a significant amount of money for an ECR as well, but quite a relatively new grant scheme as well. So I think, as sort of Jen's raised already, knowing the guidelines, and Ben's advice was absolutely invaluable at the time, around really thinking about sort of looking at the guidelines very carefully, and knowing them sort of inside and out, and even having the sort of scoring matrix printed off and sat next to your computer is a good idea when you're writing different sections of the grant as well. So start off by thinking about, I think also it's really important to write for the audience. And so Jen alluded to, the makeup of the panels that assess your grant. And I think here you're really thinking about who you're writing for. So I really thought, who is it that's going to assess this grant, and what are they going to be looking for as an assessor? And I think choosing the keywords in Sapphire is really important when you're selecting which panel it will go to. So I'm a nurse by background and I do cardiovascular research as well. So I was thinking, okay, who are the key nurses in the country that are on NHMRC panels, and could I get any advice off of them in terms of what they would be looking for, and even thinking about who are these people that are sitting on the panel. I think obviously you're going to have people like biostatisticians and economists as well. So making sure that you really address those aspects, whether or not it's things around having a power calculation where appropriate as well. But really thinking about writing for your audience, and this even comes down to things like the use of abbreviations. So, in cardiology, we love to use abbreviations right the way throughout. But if you're not coming from a cardio background and you're working in a completely different area, when you get halfway through the grant and you're like, what is CHF again? So I think there's merit in actually not using abbreviations where possible right the way throughout the grant, and making it as readable as possible as well. I think the guidelines are really important, and having that matrix printed off, as I sort of mentioned as well. But also I think, getting assistance and advice, and some advice from mentors, and really approaching this as a project in the application, and starting early and getting some good advice too. As Jen mentioned about the sort of metrics that are out there in terms of success, ready on the research portal, there's some metrics around sort of benchmarking yourself against previously successful candidates in terms of publication output, H-index, and research income, in terms of benchmarking yourself against those successfully awarded grants in the previous year. And I think that's a useful exercise to do. One thing I'd say is, and I think it'll be interesting to see what Ben and Jen sort of approaches as well, because some people think, it's not worth applying this round if you're not going to get it. And I can see people might say you're better off spending your time developing your track record, writing for publication, rather than submitting something that's probably not going to get funded. But I think there is merit in actually developing up an application that drives the thinking about your project, your program of research, and actually thinking about how to make it happen in the future years. So I think that there is a time sort of trade-off there with where you focus your time off, if it's actually developing your track record as opposed to developing up an application. But it's probably quite highly unlikely that something's going to get funded first time round. One of the things about this scheme, I think, that's quite different from others, is this is about investment in people. And it's people support, and so it's weighted 70% based really on your track record and on you. So it's 35% for publication track record alone, and 70, and that's of the 70% based on the person, where it's only 30% for the actual project. And so 35% just based on publication track record alone is a huge sort of weighting for that. So I think it's really important when you start populating your Sapphire account, or RGMS as it used to be, that it's really as detailed as possible. You've not missed anything out, very practical sort of advice, and not overlooked anything, and make sure that's populated as much as possible as well. one of the things that I think in your actual application as well, and I can't remember actually where it goes, but it's to talk about research support and environment. And before, when I've written sections about research environment, I've just kind of like taken it for granted and not really given it too much time. But I think that that's really important. One of the things, because I have the luxury and privilege of being based in a health district as well, how I sort of framed my research environment piece as well, and was maybe a bit sneaky in this, but I can be based in the Westmead precinct, and I think Jen's now in Nickham, and Nickham's in the Westmead precinct. It's the health precinct, and I think mentally framing it like that, and almost selling it like that is quite valuable, because you're attached to the Westmead sort of name if you're around that precinct. So I think thinking about how you can sort of frame some of these sections to really sort of leverage that as much as possible is really good. I won't spend too much time talking about the impact sort of stuff, as Jen sort of mentioned as well, but I'd really sort of give a shout out to the Research Impact Academy in Tamika there. I remember, I'll talk very frankly about this, Ben. I can remember having a teleconference with Tamika and Ben and being absolutely petrified by writing this section, and then getting some last minute support on that section. I think it's really, really important to get it right. And I went out for a walk down in the park, and I listened over to Tamika's podcast or lecture about 4 times. And just when she's describing about how to address that impact section and how to structure it, and actually how to sort of write that piece, because I think it's probably the hardest piece in the whole grant actually to address. And as Jen mentioned, I think trailing through Google Scholar is a great sort of activity to do. And that sort of thing takes a bit of time, but really mapping out sort of the breadcrumbs of where your research has been used. I think as an EL1, this is quite tricky and quite a high expectation from NHMRC that we write something like this, because in terms of impact, when you're just immediately out of a PhD or a few years, it's really difficult to actually describe. But I think some of this can be things like knowledge impact, and if your primary research data from your publication, from your PhD, for example, is used in a larger systematic review or in a guideline, then that's something that you can sort of include as well. And if this is a really important piece of this, meta-analysis or something like that. So I think it's really important to go back and have a look through Google Scholar and do a bit of a mapping exercise to see who's cited your work and who's using it as well. I think that's probably one of the most tricky parts of the grant to actually address. The other thing I'll probably just point out as well and flag is just getting lots of feedback from a lot of different people is really important. So I think don't approach this in a style of I'm keeping it all to myself and I won't show anyone it until the last week, and I might show it to maybe 1 or 2 people. If there's ever a time to tap into your networks and say, hey, do you mind having a look at this section now for me, or just the impact bit or the actual 4-page project proposal, have them off to different people at different times and really sort of reach out to your networks, to a few different professors from different areas to get some feedback as well. I had my ADR, who's from Virginia Schmid, from a midwifery background, to have a look at mine that was around atrial fibrillation, but really valuable feedback and really, really, really helpful as well. I also think thinking around program logic is really important as well. This is sort of my last point, or second last point, to think about how you sort of tell a bit of a career story about where you've come from and where you're going, and that is quite logical as well. And also how your program is related to what you've done and sort of where you're going, and how that sort of fits with your track record story, I think is quite important too. And thinking about, and I don't know, I think Jen's maybe addressed this quite differently from me for the actual knowledge gain. So the 4-page project proposal, I put one quite large project in with sort of 3 phases of it. Some people will do this quite differently, I think, and have more of a program with different projects mapped over the sort of 5 year as well. And so I don't know if there's one way that's better than the other, but I think you need to sort of articulate about what, if it's one big project, what will your role be in that project? Will you be leading this? And I guess coming back to sort of the feasibility aspects of it as well, if you've got 50 grand per year, can this be done in the sort of 5 year time frame as well? I'll wrap up before we hop on to Ben as well, but I think the relative to opportunity section, I've often really thought, I didn't put anything in there because I thought I've not had maternity leave and not been off sick, and I've not had any babies, so I won't put anything in that section. And one of the grant reviewers in the feedback had written, it's a shame that this applicant hasn't actually written anything in here. We can see that he does other stuff outside a research role, and whether or not that's in positions like professional leadership positions or teaching or other commitments as well. So I'd really encourage people to actually put something in that box and write that relative to opportunity section and sort of expand on it as much as possible as well, because it's something that people really do sort of take into consideration as well. So yeah, I'll wrap up there and I'll hand over to Ben. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Caleb, for those top tips. Ben, all yours.
I'll just follow on from a couple of points from Caleb before I get into the document that we created the other day. So both Caleb and Jen's applications are up online. They've given us permission to distribute them to all of our researchers. So if you ever want to have a look at how they completed their applications, the links in my email signature or the research section of the Western website will have them. If you're having trouble finding them, just send me an email. As far as the reviews go, there's a couple of people that we do use, and Tamika was one of them that Caleb got a review from. That's sort of part of our process as the applications progress through to submission. So Caleb would have submitted back at the time what we called a research concept pitch. That was approved and reviewed by internal panels at Western. We sort of deemed his application to be quite competitive, and we then had a pot of money available to distribute to a number of reviewers, and Caleb got his review that way. Moving forward, we still have money available for reviewers, but chances are more along the lines of a split between the schools and research services, essentially, if you're interested in the review. If you are interested in the review, you'll need the application sort of ready and good to go well in advance. I'll get to our NOI process in a minute. But as you progress through your application, ideally we would need to book that in a month to 2 months out of the actual deadlines from the NHMRC, which means your application is going to need to be ready and good to go 2 months prior, basically, if you're thinking that you would like some external help and a review that way. All right, so I'll share my screen now. That one. So in front of you at the moment, we have on the left is our NHMRC internal deadlines and instructions document. You can find this either on the website or in my email signature. If you need to send me an email, it's down the bottom. If not, just grab it online. Now, about halfway down this page is the Investigator Grant section. I'm just highlighting that there. But whether it's the NHMRC or ARC, we regularly update this with all of our internal and the external dates and deadlines and the requirements at each stage. So up the top in the red and the white, you can see the red is typically our internal deadlines and the requirements of each, and the white are going to either be the NHMRC or the ARC deadlines. So if we go down to the investigator grants, it's about halfway down the page. I know it's a bit small. The PDF, as soon as you download that, you can just expand it as much as possible. Now we have a guidelines link. If you click on that, that'll just link you straight to a folder that we've created in SharePoint. Typically, whenever the NHMRC release their guidelines or addenda to the guidelines, I'll automatically populate those folders and you can just grab them straight from there. The other option is going to Grant Connect. I'd advise that everybody has and gets a Grant Connect account, whether it's NHMRC, ARC. Most of the big schemes are going to release their guidelines there, and that's where you'll need to pick them up from. Now, if we go across to this here, this date is the 5th of August 2020. Now, this was our notification of intent to submit deadline. So for the investigator grants that are going in at the end of this month, basically we needed to know whether or not you were intending on submitting the application back in August. I suspect there's going to be similar timelines coming up for the next round. So if you are interested in applying, just be aware that you sort of need to know that you're going to do it 6 months to 9 months out before the actual NHMRC due dates. Now, we used to run a research concept pitch. At the moment, it's just a notification of intent to submit form. Down at the bottom of this page, you can see a number of important links. The NHMRC calendar's there, the NOI form's there, the clearance form's there, and a number of other useful bits of information. The NOI is just a simple SharePoint form, just contains a little bit of information. Once you've done the NOI, we then pass it on to the deans, the research directors, and some peers within the schools. They'll then review your EOIs and provide some feedback on that and let you know whether or not they feel it's a competitive submission, etc., etc. Now, our internal minimum data deadline has passed, and so has the NHMRC's minimum data deadline. I've already been in contact with a couple of you because I would have checked your minimum data, I think it was back on Tuesday, and we're all good to go from there. So because the NHMRC has a minimum data deadline, basically you need to make sure things, for the purposes of minimum data, are complete in Sapphire. Otherwise, it'll lock you out from being able to submit an application. So right now, anybody who has submitted minimum data is good to go. Anybody that has now missed that deadline is out until the next round, which will be this time next year. All right. Now, moving across to the 10th of March. So again, some of these things are really only going to be applicable to the couple of people in the chat that have actually, or that will actually be submitting this year. Nonetheless, the information is still relevant to any ECRs or MCRs who will want to submit in the future. So on the 10th of March, we're expecting everything in Sapphire to be complete, the grant proposal to be uploaded, and near complete. If you still need to make changes to your grant proposal after the 10th of March, then there's no issue with that. Up to a couple of days before, I don't have any problems if you want to keep making edits to your grant proposal. It's just making sure that the main content that you want to submit in the proposal is in there and you have all the headings and most of what's required there, so I can check through and make sure it's all good. The 24th of March is the approved clearance form deadline, and we need your CI and AI invitations accepted in Sapphire. Now, for the purposes of the investigator grants, there aren't going to be any CI or AI certifications that you need because it's only you on the grant. But those things do apply to other NHMRC grants that you want to submit. Now, the clearance form, if people haven't heard of that, is just the internal way that your schools and your deans approve your time commitments on a grant and a number of other things. If you haven't done one of them before, just get in contact with me. I can give you the link. The link is also down the bottom there too. They're relatively easy and they don't take too much of your time once you've done a couple of them. Caleb and Jen do them all the time and are fantastic getting them in early. So I'm sure they can, I'm sure they feel at times they're a bit of a pain, but once they've done them a number of times, they could whip them out in 5 minutes. So while I'm on the topic of clearance forms, this is helpful information regardless of the NHMRC grant. We do need a clearance form for any grant you want to submit, regardless if it's NHMRC or ARC. You would then allocate that to the research development officer responsible for your school. I'm guessing for most of the people in the chat, that RDO is going to be me. I look after medicine, NICM, 3 health sciences, nursing and midwifery. So all the health and medical related divisions and schools and institutes at the uni is your applications are typically going to come through me. All right, and then the last deadline is the NHMRC due date on the 31st of March. So as long as you let us at Research Services know early that you're putting a grant in, we'll update you throughout the process with what we require. And then it's just a matter of passing it on, and we'll check through everything and make sure the application is going to go in smoothly. All right, now the second document over on the right-hand side is the Research Services Investigator Grants information package. I put this together a couple of days ago and I've shared it in the chat, but if you can't grab it from there, then just flick me an email and I can send it to you. Typically, we do one of these for every major NHMRC and ARC grant round or scheme. For some of the smaller ones, like the MRFF grants that keep popping up, there's just not enough time to put together an information package for the many MRFF and smaller NHMRCs that they seem to be coming out with these days. So in this information package, we have some general information. In the guidelines and dates, these links all link to either SharePoint.
We couldn't see that document, Ben.
Oh, you couldn't see that one?
Yeah, you needed to move to another one, but we've all got the links, so I think that's cool.
I can run through that if you want. If not, happy to move on if we're conscious of time.
Yeah, I think we might, Ben, because people might have questions specifically that come through those guidelines, and I think most people will have seen it. So if you don't mind, I might, being aware of the time, we might just open it up to Q&A now, because I think you'll get probably questions specifically, which means we don't have to double up. So thank you to Ben, who's taken us through the timeline, which is the most important thing. And I think if there's a take-home message from Ben, it is think early and be on the front foot of this. If Ben doesn't know you're thinking about putting in a grant, you need to send him an email now. Okay, so send him an email now, because Ben's the most important person that you need to be talking about here. So please make sure that Ben knows that you're thinking of putting one in for this current round. The second most important person that you need to talk to is your ADR or your director or your dean, someone within your school, and in most instances it will be your ADR. They need to know you're also putting it in. Now, that's not a compliance issue, that's so that they can support you. Okay, so please reach out and talk to Ben and talk to your ADR if you're thinking about doing it. But
just a quick update on that one, Jeanette. There's no more investigator grants that can go in this round because minimum data's passed.
Exactly, sorry.
So it's going to have to be for the following year if anyone is interested.
Yeah, for sure. But still keep Ben at the top of your email list, over the next couple of days as you're getting your submissions ready for the internal deadline that, as Ben indicated, which is next week. So do keep an eye on those deadlines. But questions, comments, feedback, you've got 3 experts on hand here, and there's also people who are participating. We've got some senior researchers that are listening in. Hannah, I can see you there. Just as my list, I've got too many people that go over the screen. Rochelle, you're there as well, I can see on my screen. So if people have got questions, please use the raise your hand function and ask a question of our panel, or if any of our experienced researchers have got anything they'd like to add, please just jump in now. Let's just throw this open to a conversation, and I'll loosely chair it if it needs to be chaired. But the floor is open. Unmute yourselves, guys, and go.
Freya here. I've got a quick question for Jen and Caleb. How many reviewers or how many people reviewed your applications before you submitted? I'm kind of getting to that point where I feel disheartened when I'm getting more feedback now. So interested to know how many rounds of feedback you went through.
That's a good question. It would have been probably at least 5 people, I think, different individuals. And Yeah, from different areas as well. So I had some senior people look at it who are also applying, some senior colleagues, as well as some other sort of peers that are around the same level. Ash Smith, who was, Jeanette posted in the chat earlier, who was a panel member in the first round of review. She's a colleague of mine at UniSA. She reviewed my grant as well. The Research Impact Academy had some professional review on the second iteration of it. Yeah, and I'm sorry if there's anyone online that looked at it that I've forgotten. there's quite a bit of feedback, and I think Caleb made a good point in that everyone was going to give you a different perspective. It's up to you to decide on what way you think is the right way to frame it and the way to go. But Caleb, I'd be interested to hear what you.
Yeah, I think about six people as well. So I think Virginia's ADR, but also I had the writer and the Tanika from Research Impact Academy, but also a couple of peers at about the same level, external unis, and a couple of professors to look at things at different stages and also different parts. So whilst like the impact section was with someone else, the project proposal was with someone else, and it was a bit of a, that sort of last week was pretty hellish, to be honest, and just kind of bits were off at different places and sort of managing multiple versions. But I think, like Jen said, you do get conflicting stuff off people. And also, because it's relatively new, some people are sort of approaching it like they would have done, you know, a sort of project grant or something before. So I think going to maybe people that are aware of the scheme as well, or even now having L1, L2, L3 as well, could be quite an advantage too. But I also think people outside of your own field is quite good too, considering a panel too. So if it's something random, you know, not their discipline area, it's still good to get their feedback on how you've approached it, I think too.
That's a good point, because I think, you know, Jen, I think you made the comment that, and Caleb made it as well, that the readers of your grant, your reviewers at the end, they're not necessarily going to be experts in your field. And so you want people, you want it to be able to be read by a broad church of people. And so as broad a church as you can get. But if there are some of you that are feeling that you don't know too many people that might be in your field, some things you can do is, as Caleb has sort of suggested then, look at past, look at who has got a grant in the last couple of years, okay? So, and have a look at their topic areas and see if there's anyone that's in your area. It's a way of reaching out to them and creating a network if they're not on your network anyway. So you've got nothing to lose, okay, by asking people to have a look at it, and it is a way of building your network. But do go, this is when it's really important to talk to your ADRs, okay? Because your ADRs will be able to find reviewers for you at least within your own institution. So yes, but as many people as you can persuade to read, beg, pay, you should go with that.
And your ADRs and research directors as well are going to be very helpful with benchmarking too. So if benchmarking is an exercise you haven't done before, do reach out to your ADR or your research director. And Ria at the library as well is an absolute gun at this and an expert and can point you in all the right places. So you'll find there's actually quite a lot of knowledge there around benchmarking. So if you do access the researcher portal and look at those grant benchmarks that are up and you're not sure, how do I find out what proportion of my publications are in the top 10% of journals, or how do I find out proportion in Q1, that kind of thing, then they're the kind of things that your ADR research director or the library will be able to help you with.
Mm-hmm. Any other takers, comments? I'd be interested to hear from people who may have submitted a grant before, an investigator before, or a DECRA before, and where you've been unsuccessful, and if you're thinking of doing something different this round, and you wanted to bounce that off Caleb and Genevieve, if you felt that there was something you needed to add into your application. So if people have submitted before, I'd be interested to hear from those people as well as those who might be going for it for the first time. Deb Mitchinson, I can see your hand.
Hi, thank you everyone. That was really informative. I actually have a question for anyone on the panel. When thinking about the proposal section, I'm just coming off having written more of a project, you know, with grant where it was really a lot of detail. Trying to get my head into the space of writing for a program, and I heard Caleb talking about, you know, the story, and I'm just wondering the tips of how to get that right, you know, and how much detail to include versus not, and that kind of thing.
I think it's a tricky one, and I approached mine, I think, differently from Jen, in that mine was a really big project, and I think that research what you're proposing needs to be quite, you know, not just the feasibility aspects of it as well, but I think in terms of the impact of what you're going to do, it needs to make a lot of sense. And then the outcomes that you pick, if it's a quantitative or RCT design, and I welcome sort of Ben and Jen's and Jeanette's sort of thoughts on, you know, the research design that's actually proposed, and how that needs to have a lot of impact, you know, and value to it as well. So I think, and it needs to have that sort of 5-year approach. You know, it can't just be something that you could do in 6 months. Or that said as well, this can't be a huge thing that's going to cost you 15 million and you're trying to do it on 50 grand a year. So I think it's tricky. How I approached it was to write a program, really, or a project that has sort of three different phases to it. Sort of pilot, co-design phase, an actual trial, and then a translation piece to it as well. And I don't know, there was different advice about whether to or not have that translation sort of bit in it or not, and to whether or not to separate that out. And then I also thought just doing an RCT might not be enough as well. So there's quite a lot of sort of conflicting advice about how much was enough, was it big enough, and also that scaffolded approach, I think, could be risky. I've heard different assessors saying, well, it's all very well, and approaching it from quite a basic science lens of, well, if your pilot work doesn't work, that all just falls over and your project doesn't make any sense if your phase 1, whatever, doesn't work. So I think it's kind of up to you in terms of how you sort of approach it. I don't know if that's very helpful. Jen, you've done it slightly differently, yeah?
I think, yeah, slightly differently, but also sort of similar in a way. You need to have a broad overarching programmatic feel to what you're describing, because it's a 5-year program of research that they're looking at supporting. You need to think about actually addressing the selection criteria. So that includes your bits around the research vision. You do have to describe some information around the methodologies that you're going to use, what objectives you're going to try and deliver on, and the outcomes that you want to achieve as well. So you can kind of think about describing that as a program and having it as really broad, or you can drill down into more specific studies with aims and hypotheses. I think I did do something similar to you, Caleb. I had like a program with 3 kind of defined specific projects within it, and aims. But again, look, you've got 5 pages and you need to spend at least a page of that talking about your vision and how amazing, you know, your work's going to be and how you're going to save the world, etc. Before you go into 4 pages of more nitty gritty, as well as addressing the things like the research environment that Caleb brought up before. So you need to balance trying to articulate what you're going to do, make it look feasible, but without putting so much detail in that the reviewers on your panel aren't going to get the level of detail. So what I've heard from reviewers is that the kind of higher level it is, the better in that sense. So yeah, and the other point to make as well is that your research track record doesn't need to connect completely with that program of work that you articulate in the knowledge gain section or the project description section. So if you're working in a slightly adjacent area, or you're sort of stemming and going sideways a little bit as well as forward, that's fine. And that's just something to note as well, because the NHMRC is trying to encourage, you know, young people to be doing, junior researchers, I should say, because we're not all young, to be doing, you know, a wide range of work. So you can look at breadth as well as depth. It doesn't need to be as detailed as it might be in your specific area. So I guess, yeah, I know that probably doesn't answer your question. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it.
Something that I would just add in as someone who's been a reviewer, one of the things I look for is you can't expect one project to be everything. And, you know, a couple of people have said that, okay? And remember, this is also at the level where you're proposing that you're going to be a researcher for the next 20 years. So they don't expect you or want you to do everything in one project. But I think what's important and what I look for as a reviewer is that there's an awareness of where the project or the program would go next. And so even if you choose, okay, I'm not going to put in a translational arm because I just haven't got the scope within this project, to flag that would be coming next is important. And so I think I look for that sort of thing, that the person is at least thinking about where it might go over the immediate, the medium and the longer term, even if you're not saying I'm going to do it all within that scope. Any other questions, comments? Just jump in. Alex.
I just had a question around picking your brain at the impact section. I'm only 2 years post-PhD, and most of the research I've done is part of a broader research team. So I've had an active part within that team. But in terms of picking out the impact of my individual work, do you have any tips for how do you do that when most of your work's embedded as part of a larger team? I just feel like if I say, for example, you know, I can't say that my work directly, you know, it's more our work, it was a collaborative piece of work. So I'm just having a little bit of trouble negotiating that in terms of being transparent, but also saying that I was part of a team that did have impact.
I think last year, it might have changed slightly this year. I'm not sure about your contribution. You say your contribution to whatever that was, and then the research impact in terms of your contribution to the programme. So I don't know, Jen, you had some bits in there about that in terms of...
That's the field 3 section on the impact. So it's about your particular contribution to the impact. So that's where you would unpack it. So it makes sense, you know, if you're an early career researcher, a couple of years post PhD, and you've been part of a really productive and impactful team, how much of that is actually going to be solely your work? So it's about demonstrating some of the more nuanced aspects around your contribution to that. So if there was a particular part of it you can carve off and say, this is the impact we've had, and I, specifically my work, I did this and it resulted in X, Y, Z. You can demonstrate that through evidence like your role as a first author on the paper, or if you're a senior author on the paper, or co-first or second author or something like that. If you've gone to a conference and presented that work and talked about it with your name at the front. If you've had other things that have resulted from that, I think I mentioned this in my brief presentation at the start around invitations that have stemmed off it, or some other form of national, international recognition for your expertise in that area that has been a result of your particular contribution to that program of work. So have a look at the evidence you've got in hand that can kind of show your leadership in that particular area, and that'll help kind of carve off what was yours in comparison to the whole group's work, because it is an important question. I think this is where it comes down to the publication aspect, and this is really important for the EL2 applicants that are online, because I've had colleagues that have come back with feedback. They've got great CVs, but they've been part of a group with a senior leader who is always a senior author on every paper that's submitted from that group, regardless of their contribution, which I know is not always right. And so the reviewers have come back, and 4 out of the 5 reviewers have said things like, not enough senior author papers, I can't see how this person's actually leading this part of the research, etc. So the 5 papers that you pick as well at the start in that 35% part of your track record section is also going to be important in starting to feed into that narrative that you discuss in field 3 of the impact. So if you can showcase it there, and then you can kind of pull it out and say the details in field 3, that's going to be quite helpful for you.
Thanks, really helpful.
Jed's asked a question in the chat about how much you need to describe your organisational capacity in your centres, and it goes to the question of the research environment that Caleb spoke to. You do need to mention it, and what you need to mention needs to say how good that capacity is. So in your case, Jed, you can talk about what's available within your school in nursing and midwifery. You can talk about 3, and I'm happy to help you with that. So if you need a section around 3, and I can also help you around what the university's capacity is, and as Caleb said, making links where we need to with our important health precincts. So we can do that. So I'm happy to help in that section there. But Caleb and Jen may have some specific ideas on how much, in terms of, if your question is it this much or that much, they can tell you how much in terms of space.
I'm going to need to jump offline. I'm sorry, Jeanette. I'm chairing an interview panel now, so I can't be late for it, unfortunately. But
Thank you, Jen.
I'll leave you in everyone's capable hands. But if anyone's got specific questions, feel free to pop me an email as well, and I can try and answer them, or we can have a quick phone call.
Great, thanks, Jen.
Thanks,
so we
guys.
might just go for another minute or so. So Caleb, if you just want to answer if it's this much or that much.
Yeah, just about that much from me. And I think that point about the narrative of the support and it is really important. And there's a way to kind of almost sell that. And also think don't overlook partnerships with the LHDs and with Sphere as well. And so particularly with the CAGs and the platforms in Sphere and really sort of, I think, bring them to the top. But also like the partnerships with the LHDs, I think is important, particularly if you're sort of proposing some clinical research and access and support that they can provide as well. That sort of precinct sort of narrative is quite good. And I think now with like Nickham being on site at Westmead is quite a good example how you can say you've got access to the Westmead precinct. It's co-located in the precinct, and if you have some access to different resources and so on there as well. And have you got any thoughts?
All good for me on that one, Caleb. Again, depending on who you speak to, I think everyone's going to have different opinions of what you should and shouldn't include in there. But yeah, good suggestions.
Mm-hmm. We might wrap it up there because everyone's time is precious, and there's probably at least 12 of you online that need this time to actually go off and write your application. So I'll let you go off and do that. But thank you very much, Jen. We'll thank offline. Ben and Caleb, thank you very much. And I'm sure, I know, in fact, that Caleb and Ben will be happy to receive any sort of, if people want to contact them directly, please do so. But we'll save this chat, we'll save this, Zoom, and we'll put all those resources up on the 3 site and send them out to the people who have been online. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. You can use your little reactions button. Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers. Thanks, guys.